Welcome to Empathy Stories, where remarkable tales of courage and human connection come to life. Today, we bring you an extraordinary journey of a 12-year-old boy who defied all odds, stepping into the cockpit during a moment of crisis. Join us as we explore this inspiring story of bravery and dreams taking flight. The dawn light filtered through the large glass windows of Denver International Airport, casting golden hues across the bustling terminal. Travelers of all kinds meandered through the crowded corridors, families weighed down by oversized luggage, business people in crisp suits clutching coffee cups, and couples exchanging excited whispers. Among them was 12-year-old Liam Carter, holding tightly to the straps of his leather backpack as he walked alongside his mother. Elaine, a petite woman with kind eyes and a determination born from years of single parenthood, glanced at her son with a mix of exhaustion and pride. For months, she had worked extra shifts at the local diner in their small Colorado town to afford this trip. This vacation to Honolulu wasn't just a getaway. It was her chance to give Liam something extraordinary. Liam wasn't like other boys his age. He didn't spend hours glued to video games or kicking soccer balls in the park. Instead, he immersed himself in books about aviation, meticulously studying flight manuals and tinkering with online flight simulators on their old computer. His room was a shrine to airplanes, posters of Boeing 747s, models of fighter jets, and shelves filled with aviation magazines. Yet, for all his passion, Liam was reserved. He rarely talked about high. Elaine nudged him gently as they approached gate 23. XI. Liam nodded, his eyes scanning the tarmac through the terminal window. His heart skipped a beat as he spotted the plane, a sleek silver Boeing 737-800. The sunlight gleamed off its metallic surface, and for a moment, the world seemed to quiet around him. He could already imagine himself in the cockpit, gripping the controls, guiding. They boarded soon after, greeted by the warm smiles of the flight attendants. Liam, ever the aviation enthusiast, had requested a window seat. As he settled in, he immediately pressed his face to the small, oval window. Watching the ground crew bustle below, Elaine took the seat beside him, glancing at the safety card in front of her. "Want to trade S?" "No thanks," Liam murmured, his gaze fixed on the activity outside. His mind was already soaring ahead, imagining the mechanics behind every movement of. Soon, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Greg Martin speaking. Welcome aboard Pacific Horizon Flight 302. Nonstop service to Honolulu. We'll be cruising at an altitude of 35.000 feet, with a flight time of approximately 6 hours. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the Jew." The engines roared to life, and Liam's heart swelled with anticipation. He gripped the armrest as the plane taxied onto the runway, his pulse quickening with every second. Then came the exhilarating moment of takeoff, the sudden push back into his seat. As the plane leveled off, Liam's excitement slowly gave way to a quiet calm. He leaned back in his seat, staring out at the infinite expanse of sky and sea. Honolulu was still hours away, but in his mind, he was already there, diving into turquoise waters, walking on warm, sandy beaches, and marveling at the volcanic sea. Elaine watched her son with a smile, though a flicker of concern crossed her face. Liam was a dreamer, no doubt, but he was also a boy who had known loss. Liam's father, a military pilot, had died in a training accident when Liam was just a toddler. Though, as the hours passed, passengers settled into their routines. Some dozed off, others flicked through magazines or watched in-flight movies. The flight attendants moved gracefully up and down the aisles, offering drinks and snacks with practiced ease. The hum of the engines created a soothing rhythm, and the atmosphere aboard the plane was one of tranquil anticipation. Liam, however, couldn't shake the nagging curiosity about what was happening in the cockpit. The thought of Captain Martin and his co-pilot navigating through the vast skies filled him with wonder. What buttons were they pressing? What calculations were they making? He imagined himself sitting beside them, asking questions, learning every. But then, as if interrupting his thoughts, the plane jolted. It wasn't severe, but it was enough to make passengers glance around nervously. The seatbelt sign dinged on, and Captain Martin's voice returned. This time, ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated and ensure your seatbelts are fastened. We're due. Liam noticed the shift in the captain's tone. It wasn't panic, but there was an undercurrent of tension that made his stomach tighten. He looked at Elaine, who smiled reassuringly. Though her grip on, the turbulence worsened. The plane lurched to one side, eliciting gasps and cries from the passengers. Overhead compartments rattled, and a tray of drinks spilled into the aisle. Liam clutched his armrest, his knuckles white, as his heart pounded in. Then, it happened. The plane entered a sharp, gut-wrenching dive. The force pressed Liam back into his seat, his ears popping painfully as the ocean below seemed to rush toward them. Passengers screamed, their panic spreading like wildfire. Liam's mind raced. This wasn't normal turbulence. Something had gone terribly wrong. And yet, amid the chaos, the cockpit remained silent. The intercom offered no R. I have to check on the pilots, Liam said suddenly, his voice trembling but resolute. Elaine's. But he was already unbuckling his seatbelt, propelled by an instinct he didn't fully understand. Before anyone could stop him, Liam darted into the aisle, weaving past frightened passengers and spilled luggage. He pounded on the door with his fists, shouting, Captain, co-pilot, are you okay? No answer. A flight ATT. There's something wrong with the pilots. The flight attendant froze, her eyes wide with dawning realization. Without a word, she grabbed the emergency access code keypad and punched in the sequence. The door hissed. Both pilots were slumped over in their seats, unconscious. Warning lights blinked furiously on the control panel, and alarms blared in deafening succession. The plane, the flight attendant, Liam stared at the chaos in front of him, fear and adrenaline coursing through his veins. The cockpit, once a place of wonder, now felt like a battleground. He thought of the hours he'd spent immersed in flight simulators, the pages of manuals he'd devoured, the intricate models he'd built. None of it had prepared him. I can help, he said, his voice steady. The flight attendant hesitated, torn between disbelief and desperation. Finally, she nodded, grabbing This is Pacific Horizon Flight 302, she said, her voice shaking. We have a medical emergency. Both pilots are unresponsive. We need immediate assistance. There's a boy here who might be able to. Liam swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the controls. He had never been more terrified, but he couldn't think about fear now. He thought about Elaine, about the passengers depending on him, about his father, who had once faced skies just as daunting. Taking a deep breath, Liam sat in the co-pilot seat and gripped the controls. The journey ahead would test him like nothing ever had. But one thing was CLE. Liam's fingers trembled as he adjusted the headset, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The cockpit felt suffocating, blinking lights, blaring alarms, and the low hum of the autopilot barely masking the tension. The plane shuddered again, dropping slightly, as if the sky itself was testing the boy's courage. He gripped the yoke, his heart pounding in rhythm with the warning chimes. Pacific Horizon Flight 302. This is Honolulu Air Traffic Control. A calm, authoritative voice finally crackled through the headset. We've received your emergency signal. Who am I speaking with? Liam cleared his throat, his voice barely above a whisper. Liam Carter. I'm 12 years old. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for doubt to creep in. Then, the controller's voice returned, steady and composed. Liam, this is Controller Davies. I need you to stay calm. We're going to get you and everyone else on board safely to the ground. Are you ready to help me? Liam swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded, forgetting they couldn't see him. I'm ready, he said, his voice wavering but determined. Good. First, I need you to tell me about the pilots. Are they breathing? Liam turned to the flight attendant, who was frantically checking pulses. Yes, she confirmed. Both are alive but unconscious. Understood, Davies replied. Medical teams will be waiting for them when you land. Right now, the most important thing is keeping the plane steady. Liam, do you see the autopilot panel? Liam scanned the bewildering array of switches and buttons until he found the familiar setup from his flight simulators. Yes, I see it. Good. Tell me the altitude reading. 22,000 feet. Liam replied. And it's dropping. Davies' voice tightened slightly. Okay, we'll need to regain some altitude. I'm going to walk you through disengaging the autopilot and taking manual control. Are you ready? Liam hesitated, his hands clammy against the yoke. For a brief moment, fear threatened to overwhelm him. How could he possibly take control of a real plane? He was just a kid, but then he thought of the passengers, his mother, the families, the children. They were depending on him. I'm ready, he said firmly. Okay, Davies said. Locate the autopilot disengage button. Press it. Liam's hand hovered over the button for a second, then pressed it. The plane jolted slightly as the autopilot clicked off. The yoke in his hands became heavier, the aircraft responding immediately to his touch. He pulled back gently, just as Davies instructed, lifting the nose of the plane to regain altitude. Easy, Liam, Davies encouraged. Slow and steady. Watch the altimeter. The needle began to rise. 23.000. 24.000, then finally 25.000 feet. The plane steadied, the warning alarm subsiding slightly. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Liam exhaled. Great job, Liam, Davies said, his voice warm with reassurance. You're doing amazing. Now we're going to keep her level while we prepare for descent into Honolulu. The passengers, oblivious to the specifics of what was happening in the cockpit, were gripped by a collective unease. Some held hands, murmuring prayers, while others sat stiffly, their faces pale with fear. Elaine, still in her seat, clutched the armrest tightly, her thoughts fixed on Liam. She had always known her son was remarkable, but she had never imagined he'd be called to do something so extraordinary. Tears welled in her eyes, a mixture of pride and terror as she whispered under her breath. You can do this, Liam. Back in the cockpit, Liam focused intently on Davies' voice, which guided him through every step. Liam, we're going to start planning your descent. Do you see the horizon indicator on the panel? Yes, Liam replied, scanning the instrument. Good. That's going to be your best friend during the descent. Keep it steady. Now, adjust the throttle lightly, Liam, and begin a gradual descent. Liam's hands moved carefully, every adjustment deliberate. The plane began to dip, the Hawaiian Islands coming into view on the horizon. It should have been a moment of awe for Liam, but his thoughts were fixed entirely on the task at hand. The aircraft responded sluggishly to his commands, and the occasional jolt reminded him just how much could go wrong. Davies, Liam said, his voice shaking slightly. What if I mess up? You won't. Davies replied instantly. You've already done the hardest part. Just keep listening to my instructions. You've got this. Liam. Liam nodded, his grip on the yoke firming. The controller's confidence in him was contagious. And though fear lingered in the back of his mind, it was now overshadowed by a growing sense of determination. Liam, Davies continued. Do you see the runway? It should be in sight. Liam squinted through the windshield and felt his heart leap. There was a long strip of concrete stretching out from the shoreline, framed by lush green trees and sparkling water. Relief surged through him, but it was quickly tempered by the realization that landing was the most dangerous part of the flight. I see it, Liam confirmed. Good. Now, lower the landing gear. You're going to begin your final approach. Liam's hands shook as he reached for the landing gear lever. He pulled it down, and the plane shuddered as the gear deployed. A cacophony of alarms erupted, and Liam froze, his breath caught in his throat. Don't panic, Davies said quickly. Ignore the alarms. Focus on the runway. Keep the descent steady. Liam's focus narrowed to the strip of concrete ahead. The plane resisted his commands, turbulence buffeting the aircraft as he adjusted the flaps and throttle. Sweat dripped down his face, and his arms ached from the strain of holding the yoke steady. Behind him, the flight attendant stood in the doorway, watching the boy with awe. She had never seen anything like this, a child, calm under unimaginable pressure, guiding an airliner full of lives. Almost there, Davies said, his voice steady. Ease the nose up just before touchdown. Trust the instruments. Liam. The ground rushed up to meet them. For a terrifying moment, it felt as if the plane was falling too fast. But Liam remembered Davies' advice. He flared the nose, bringing the wheels into position. The tires screeched as they made contact with the asphalt, the plane bouncing once before settling onto the runway. Reverse thrust, Davies instructed. Liam obeyed, engaging the reverse thrusters and applying the brakes. The aircraft slowed, the runway speeding by in a blur until, finally, it came to a halt. For a moment, there was silence in the cabin, as if the world itself had paused to take a collective breath. Then, the passengers erupted into cheers and applause. Strangers hugged one another, tears streaming down their faces. Elaine, unable to hold back any longer, pushed her way to the cockpit. Liam, she cried, pulling him into a fierce hug. Oh, my sweet boy, you did it. You saved us. Liam clung to her, the adrenaline fading and exhaustion setting in. He looked up at her, his eyes wide and filled with wonder. I did it, Mom, he whispered. I really did it. Outside, emergency vehicles raced toward the plane, medical teams ready to tend to the unconscious pilots. But inside the cockpit, Liam sat in a daze, trying to process what had just happened. He had dreamed of flying his entire life, but he had never imagined his first flight would be like this. Controller Davies' voice came through the headset, breaking the moment. Liam, you're a hero. You saved all those lives today. Well done. Liam nodded, though he couldn't yet fully grasp the magnitude of what he had achieved. For now, he was just grateful to be back on solid ground. As the passengers began to disembark, many stopped to thank him, their gratitude etched on their faces. Liam smiled shyly, unsure of how to respond to the overwhelming praise. As he stepped out onto the tarmac, the cool Hawaiian breeze brushed against his face. The sky, once a place of danger, now seemed filled with endless possibilities. And though Liam was still just a boy, he knew one thing for certain: the sky was where he belonged. As Liam stepped down from the plane, the scene on the tarmac was surreal. Flashing emergency lights reflected off the glossy fuselage, and a swarm of emergency personnel hurried toward the aircraft. Paramedics rushed past him to attend to the unconscious pilots. Behind him, passengers were streaming out, some sobbing, others dazed. But every face carried the same expression: gratitude. Elaine gripped Liam's hand tightly as they were ushered toward a waiting area by airport staff. Her tears had not stopped, though her voice had softened into quiet words of reassurance. You're safe now, sweetheart. It's all over. But for Liam, it didn't feel over. The adrenaline that had propelled him through the flight had ebbed, leaving behind a wave of exhaustion and an ache in his chest that was hard to describe. He wasn't sure if it was relief, fear, or something entirely new. He could still feel the yoke in his hands, the slight resistance of the aircraft as it obeyed his commands. The weight of responsibility lingered, and he wondered if he'd done enough, if he'd truly been prepared for the task. The waiting area was soon filled with passengers and crew, their murmured voices blending with the hum of activity outside. Some approached Liam, their words spilling out in a rush of emotion. You're a hero, kid, one man said, his voice thick with gratitude. You saved my family. A woman hugged him, whispering through tears. I don't know how you did it, but thank you. Liam could only nod, his words lost in the overwhelming tide of emotion. Elaine shielded him gently, murmuring soft apologies to those who wanted to get closer. She could see the toll it had taken on her son and knew he needed space. As the chaos settled, a man in a crisp suit approached them. His presence commanded attention, and his expression was a mix of awe and admiration. Liam Carter, he asked, his voice low but firm. Liam nodded hesitantly, stepping closer to his mother. "Yes, sir. I'm Captain Reynolds, Director of Operations for Pacific Horizon Airlines," the man said, kneeling slightly to meet Liam's eyes. "I wanted to personally thank you for what you did today. What you accomplished was nothing short of extraordinary." Liam shuffled his feet, unsure how to respond. I just did what I could," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the floor. Reynolds smiled warmly. "And what you did saved 216 lives. That's not something anyone could do, let alone a 12-year-old boy. You showed bravery and skill beyond your years." Elaine placed a protective arm around Liam's shoulders. "He's had a passion for flying since he could talk," she said, pride and exhaustion mingling in her voice. "But this was more than we ever imagined." Reynolds straightened and handed Liam a small card. "If you ever want to pursue that passion, Pacific Horizon would be honored to help you. Free training, mentorship, whatever you need. You've earned it." Liam stared at the card, the airline's logo gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The words hung in the air, tantalizing yet daunting. Could he really take this experience and turn it into something more? He tucked the card into his pocket, not yet ready to answer that question. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The story of Flight 302 quickly became headline news, and Liam's name was on everyone's lips. Reporters clamored for interviews, their cameras and microphones creating a chaotic circus around the quiet boy from Indiana. Elaine did her best to shield him from the noise, declining offers for TV appearances and book deals. "He's just a child," she told them firmly. "He needs time to process this." Still, it was impossible to avoid the attention entirely. Their hotel room was flooded with calls, and even strangers on the street recognized them, offering words of thanks and admiration. Liam smiled politely, but each encounter left him feeling more overwhelmed. He longed for the simplicity of his small town, for the quiet hours spent with his flight simulator, dreaming of the skies without the weight of expectations. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Hawaiian horizon, Liam sat on the balcony of their hotel, staring out at the ocean. The soft rustle of palm trees and the distant crash of waves were soothing. Yet his thoughts were tangled. Elaine joined him, sitting in the chair beside his. She didn't speak at first, letting the quiet settle between them. Then, softly, she said, "You've been quiet since the landing. What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Liam hesitated, then glanced at her. "What if I had failed?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I couldn't do it?" Elaine reached over, taking his hand in hers. "But you didn't fail, Liam. You didn't just try. You succeeded. You saved every single person on that plane. That's not something to doubt. That's something to be proud of." Tears filled his eyes, but he blinked them away. "I was so scared, Mom. I didn't think I could do it. And yet you did," she said firmly. "Liam, being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what needs to be done, even when you're scared. That's what makes you a hero." Liam looked out at the horizon, her words settling in his chest. They didn't erase his fears, but they gave him something to hold on to, a sense of pride that, while fragile, was beginning to grow. When they returned home, life slowly began to regain some semblance of normalcy. The media frenzy faded, and Liam was able to return to school and his quiet routines. But something had changed. His classmates, once indifferent to his love of planes, now looked at him with a mix of awe and respect. Teachers invited him to speak about his experience, and while he was nervous at first, he found that sharing his story helped him process the emotions that still lingered. His room, once a sanctuary of flight posters and manuals, became a place of ambition. He dove deeper into his studies of aviation, poring over technical guides and watching instructional videos. He even wrote a letter to Pacific Horizon Airlines, thanking Captain Reynolds for his offer and expressing his desire to one day take them up on it. On weekends, Elaine would drive him to the local airfield, where he began taking introductory flying lessons. The instructors were amazed at his natural talent. But for Liam, it was more than skill. It was a calling, a connection to the sky that felt as essential as breathing. Years later, On a crisp autumn morning, Liam stood in a pilot's uniform on the tarmac of the very airfield where he'd first learned to fly. His mother watched from a distance, tears in her eyes, as her son climbed into the cockpit of a commercial jet for his first official flight as a licensed pilot. As the plane soared into the sky, Liam felt a familiar thrill, the same rush he'd felt as a boy, staring out the window of Flight 302. Only now, he wasn't just dreaming of the skies. He was living them, carrying with him the courage, love, and determination that had brought him here. The clouds parted ahead, revealing endless blue. For Liam Carter, the sky was no longer a place of fear. It was home. Thank you for watching and being part of this incredible journey here on Empathy Stories. Lucas's tale reminds us of the power of courage, determination, and believing in oneself, even in the face of unimaginable challenges. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Your support helps us bring these heartfelt narratives to life. Until next time, stay inspired, stay empathetic, and remember, sometimes the most extraordinary heroes come from the most unexpected places.